And I'll bring the camera to them before you start recording. Say hi.
Oh my goodness. Hello, everybody.
Hi. There's 4 of them in the car right now. Mom duties, right?
Uh-huh. Yep, just wait till they're driving. Thank you for that. Let's see, and Cindy Lou, I'll let you give me the heads up when we have a quorum, please.
Thank you. I'm just running through the names now. You have a quorum, Dante. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy Lou. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is February 10. It is 5:01, and this is the meeting of the Salt Lake City Racial Equity and Policing Commission. I welcome you, commissioners and the facilitators, and also any community members that we have, certainly staff. Appreciate your participation, and any other guests that we might have. We have a packed agenda tonight, so I'm just going to jump into that if that's all right. First, just a brief summary of the listening sessions. This is the first time that the full commission has met since the completion of, or at least partial completion maybe, of the listening sessions, and certainly the most recent one with the full community. And so Larry, if you wanted to give us an update on the listening sessions, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. Everybody can hear me okay. I want to first of all just thank Mayor Mendenhall, Chief Brown, and all of the commissioners for their excellent participation in the listening session that took place on TV on the 28th. I'll just very, very briefly show you some of the compiled results from the questions that we were putting out. This is something that we're still in the process of sort of fine tuning as a full report. But I think this will show you where our respondents said they were dialed in from. As you can see, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know I had feedback. Apologies. Any better now? Less feedback? Still feedback? Okay. This shows you, that gives you a sense of some of where folks said they were dialed in from, what ethnicity they identified as. So you see about 14% identifying as Black or African American, 14% Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. I will say the numbers for Hispanic, Latino, and Chicano were a little bit higher on the phone. These are the text results, so I need to aggregate those. But I think in total, we have roughly the same percentages, a little bit higher on the Hispanic, Latino, Chicano side. Experiences with police in Salt Lake City, as you can see, a little over 60% said either great or okay, while about 14% said they were negative, and a quarter said they hadn't had any interactions. Most folks were interested in having better training for the police in either cultural competency and implicit bias or crisis intervention. Other folks, when it came to the question about recruitment, wanted to see SLCPD do a better job of recruiting officers from all backgrounds through a more welcoming culture or stronger outreach. And then we compiled a huge number of comments that we have not touched or edited or anything of the sort. Of course, there were the comments that were taken audibly during the session, which we've documented in full text transcript, and then we also have these texts in unabridged format. So we're in the process of kind of going through and tagging each of the comments by theme, and then we'll be able to kind of orchestrate a frequently asked questions that can go out to the public, as well as make sure that each of the subcommittees has the questions that are germane to their particular scope. But you see there are quite a few comments as you go through here. Now, some folks went to great levels of detail, even on text message. So we are going to spend a little bit more time processing all of these open-ended comments for you, in addition to the multiple choice responses. I was remiss, and I want to also thank the council, the city council, for their participation in the event. And I do want to let you all know that, we, which is to say the facilitators, are very much open to, continued feedback. I was able to join the training subcommittee after the listening session for their meeting and got some great feedback. But if others on the commission have any feedback to share about the session, we welcome that. We are contemplating offering a subsequent public listening session closer to when your recommendations begin to crystallize, so that the community can hear what they are and react to those. We'll present something more formal on that probably in the coming weeks. And then we've also done smaller group listening sessions, as I think I've mentioned, one with the chief and some of his assistant and deputy chiefs, one with a set of officers that are closer to the street beat, so to speak, patrol officers and the like, one with school resource officers, and one with a group of people who identified as having some sort of traumatic brain injury or other similar intellectual kind of disability, that were able to share their experiences in dealing with the police. And we're in the process of working on scheduling some other listening sessions, including with the school community. I had a request that I do want to honor and follow up on, to schedule other listening sessions with particular subsets of our community, be it by ethnicity or culture or race. So I would invite you all to reach out to me directly or through Coletta Lynch, and I'm happy to coordinate those with you all. I think the main goal here is to make sure that everyone with a stake in the outcome of your work gets a chance to be heard. So we think that those small group sessions are very helpful to that. And as a matter of fact, part of the outcome of the listening sessions with the police officers is something you'll see tonight, in the form of some officers joining this conversation for the first time. Dante, I think that's all I have for the moment.
Thank you, Larry. And just as a comment before I just open it up for any questions or thoughts, I think the general feeling among many, if not all of the commissioners, is that there was not the maybe hoped for response, either from communities of color specifically, or as it related to racial equity in policing more broadly. Many of the conversations and comments from community were important, but not specific to racial equity. So just as an overall comment, which is I think why Larry just mentioned the possibility of doing some more targeted listening sessions. I'll just open it up. Any thoughts or questions from any of the commissioners?
Larry, you said that this was mostly text?
The results, Moises, that I showed were mostly text. We had a robust number of folks who cast their poll responses by phone. Unfortunately, they're just in 2 spots, so I need to spend a little bit of time redoing the graphs to show the aggregated data.
Do you have any idea how long that would be? I'm just wondering because some of those were a little bit surprising, and so I just like to see when it's aggregated.
Yeah, I should be able to do it by the end of this week. So sometime on Friday, I should be able to send that out via email. I'll work with the staff.
Okay. And if a thought or question comes to mind later on, we can always circle back to it, because I think the listening sessions are absolutely an important component to really being able to inform the work that we're doing. So don't hesitate to circle back to that. Just want to pause and check and see if there's any calls, and maybe offer the phone number call in for community members who might be listening to there.
There are not any calls at this time. The phone number for folks who'd like to comment to the commission is 800-934-9182, 800-934-9182. 82.
Thank you. Next up on the agenda, we have some guests from Matrix Consulting, who are the consultants who will be working on the zero-based budgeting component that working with the police department, and it's been building its zero-based budgeting. And I'll just let them describe the process of what that looks like and maybe how it can inform the work, since a part of our charge is to address the budget of the police department. In many of the conversations we've been having, as well as recommendations we've been considering, have budget implications. So the importance of what their work is, I don't think can be overstated. And so appreciate them being here this evening. So I'll just turn it over to whomever is going to take the lead on this. So Matrix Consulting.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Richard Brady. I'm the president of Matrix Consulting Group and the project manager on this assignment. With me is Alan Pennington, who's a senior vice president with the firm. And we are both leading what is a much broader scope of work than zero-based budgeting. So and that's, I think, part of the reason why we're here tonight. So if I can share my screen, I've got a PowerPoint presentation. Looks like I can. So let me do that. So again, thank you very much for this first opportunity to meet with you. I want to use this to open the door to have other opportunities for input into this important process. By way of introduction, let me just spend a minute to talk a little bit about who we are. We're a firm that specializes in two things that are important to the study. One is law enforcement, and the other one, as you mentioned, is cost of service and budgeting. We have extensive experience working, first of all, with law enforcement agencies in North America, most of those in the United States, but in Canada as well. And we provide a wide variety of services to local government relating to policing, including community-centered policing, 21st century policing kinds of concepts, resource and management planning, staffing deployment and scheduling studies and organizational assessments. But importantly, we are one of the leading firms in this country doing cost of service, cost allocation, and budgeting studies for our clients as well. And we work with hundreds of agencies across the country providing those kinds of services. We're a fact-based firm, but that doesn't lose sight of how important stakeholder input is throughout our studies. So while we use facts to prove that there are issues associated with operations in some way, stakeholder input, including not just in this case, the police department, but community input is important in a number of ways. We also are known for having detailed implementation strategies, and I think that's evidenced by our success in having a lot of our recommendations implemented. So a little bit about this process and this study that we've been asked to do. The genesis of this study took about a year to get to our starting point. About a year ago, it started with the council, as you mentioned, needing to have better information to make policy and resource decisions on police services so that they could be in a better position to understand requests for additional staff or for different kinds of services or reorganization, and to be in a better position to independently question and evaluate what those services are. But as spring and summer evolved and police-involved deaths occurred and the protests that happened in Salt Lake City and nationwide, the scope of work grew to include many items in our scope of work to make sure that all the mechanisms and steps were reviewed to make the police department more accountable to the public, and that the roles that they were performing to the public were appropriate in a number of ways. The recession associated with COVID-19 and everything that's happened since then has underscored the importance of those first two things. So what started out as a series of budgeting kinds of scopes of work grew to a number of operational service and police accountability issues as well. So we've got in total 18 items within our scope of work that collectively make this a very comprehensive assessment of the Salt Lake City Police Department. So we were selected relatively late last year. We began the study at the end of the year. When I say the end of the year, it was literally between the Christmas and New Year's holidays. So we've been working pretty solidly since then. So I'm going to turn it over to Alan, and he can talk about the financial scope of work, and we'll come back to me to talk about the operational items. So Alan?
Thanks, Richard, and thanks for having us here tonight. So on the financial scope, to date, what we have done is we've collected a lot of data regarding the current budget and have started understanding that in terms of what's budgeted, how it's budgeted, and what it's supporting. And the tasks that we're going to be doing in the financial scope include developing initially a financial profile, which will be nothing more than summarizing the current approaches the department's using for the budgeting and where the money is being allocated, the services it supports, and even down to the line item categories that they're using. The next step we're going to be looking at then is how to categorize those costs at both a functional and an organizational level by looking at the different line items and making sure that they're grouped not just in departments correctly, but to the right functions that they're supporting. And that's a pretty significant effort. And that's where we've been spending a lot of time understanding where the funding's really going now, so that we can really help them develop an approach that puts forth accurate costs for their service delivery. Following that assessment, we're going to do a fully burdened cost assessment of the different budget and expense categories. And that basically ensures that we're counting not just the direct costs like salary and supplies and materials, but those other costs that the department incur. And that can be benefits, settlements, for employees that retire. There are costs that are charged to the departmental budget. And so we need to make sure we have a broad understanding of each of those elements, so that the full cost of the police department can be categorized and explained. After that, we really move into some analytical components, which are looking at how do we reorganize the budget to better reflect the service delivery in terms of making sure that for each of the organizational units within the police department, that we've allocated the full cost to provide those services, and policy decisions can be made about increasing or decreasing those service levels and knowing what the budgetary impacts would be. That really gets to the heart of the zero-based budgeting, is ensuring that all of those costs are tied together. And as policy decisions are made, we want more of this, less of this, a different approach to this. There's accurate, reliable data from the budget that policymakers can use to make those decisions. We'll also provide some recommendations on budgetary best practices, and this may involve things changing approaches that the city currently has. So this is much more broad ranging. We're not limited by the historical approaches to budgeting they've taken. They've really asked us to say, what are some of the best practices nationally in terms of budget development, budget monitoring, budget administration that would be beneficial for us in this activity moving forward. And then we have our final phase, which is after our analytical phase, it will be assisting the city council as needed during the zero-based budget exercise. So that piece is not overly quantified yet. It's there to help them as they move forward with that effort, to provide the support and the analysis needed to make sure that's a successful effort.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So as with the financial scope of work on the operational side, we've got 9 elements to our scope of work, and I've summarized them and categorized them a little bit here. They all come down to 3 kinds of scope areas for us. One is police accountability. Second one is, are they fulfilling the appropriate roles, and are we using police officers as opposed to other kinds of public resources to the best advantage? And are police officers supported appropriately and in their work? So on the accountability side, we're looking deeply into the internal affairs and disciplinary processes within the police department to make sure that they compare to best practices, and we are looking at both processes and oversight and transparency associated with that. More generally, in personnel management system, we're looking at performance reviews, staff mentoring, staff development, those types of things. As you know, the city's transitioning from a civil service process to a hearing officer system, and that's still being in the process of being implemented. And we are working with them to evaluate the impacts in terms of the police department. We're looking at some issues associated with the oversight of body-worn camera, specifically relating to reviews, and making sure that that conforms to what I would categorize as emerging practices in that area. Looking at core versus non-core functions within the police department, especially looking at the role that the current Community Connection Center has, and opportunities to expand that, first of all, to more hours, more of a case management function, as well as response, but also looking at response to non-emergency calls for service, and where there are opportunities to use civilians in response rather than police department response to police officer response to non-emergency calls, not even crime calls, quality of life types of issues and things like that. Conversely, we're also looking at opportunities to improve support given to police officers through counseling, as well as early intervention techniques and the like. And we're also looking at external partnerships with other governmental entities, as well as private nonprofits and service organizations like that. So as Alan mentioned, we have spent, since the end of the year holidays, immersed in interviews within the police department, but also on the financial services side. We've interviewed the council and some other interviews externally, some other external stakeholders. I was a couple minutes late to this meeting because I was finishing up with district attorney, but we have had interviews with the CRB and other important stakeholders in this process. At the same time, in both the budgetary side and the operational side, we've been collecting information so that we understand the as-is situation, both on the financial side and the operational and service side within the police department. We're here tonight because we would like your input on this process, and we're very much open to subsequent interviews individually as we can with commission members, so that we can get this important viewpoint, certainly on the operational scope of work items that we mentioned. We have a really fast track study which I need to point out. We're going to be completed the end of March, early April. There'll be some things that go on, but the budget side of this really drives that timeline because of the city's budgetary process. So we're working really hard. We got a team. It's not just Alan and I. We got a team of about half a dozen people working on this. So that's in a very fast moving nutshell the study. And I'll stop sharing my screen and answer your questions.
Thank you, sir, and sir as well. Maybe just one question before everybody jumps in for you. As you're making your evaluations and recommendations in terms of weighing where to place money, where to remove or reduce funding in certain areas in the police department, is there any racial equity lens that's being used to evaluate that as it relates to impacts on certain communities and other things that have caused a good chunk of this based on this past summer and other events in the communities? Is there any racial equity lens being placed on how you're evaluating and making your recommendations?
Yeah, of course, that's a really great question. So we're taking going to great lengths to make sure that we within our team are not siloed ourselves, so that the finance side isn't working independently of the operational side. So since our scope of work includes a number of things relating to employee disciplining, oversight, compliance, and transparency, yes, that lens is being applied to that, so that we make sure that those resources on the financial side are dedicated to that area as well.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners?
Reverend Davis, I'd like to know if you are using a training lens and any perspective.
Absolutely. When I mentioned in that second part of the scope of work, the personnel management side of things, training is certainly within that. I put it more broadly as development employee development, but training is certainly part of that. So we're looking at certainly not just restricted to police officer training in a traditional sense, but looking at procedural justice, racial equity, crisis intervention, those kinds of training things as well.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, and I apologize if you mentioned this and I missed it, but when you talked about identifying core versus non-core functions of the police, how do you determine that? Is there like an industry standard of what's considered a core function and non-function? How do you evaluate that?
Well, there have been traditional ways of looking at industry best practices in that way, and I think when I talked about things like having somebody other than a police officer handle many lower priority calls for service. That's an idea that has been around law enforcement for decades, although I think there's a little more interest and urgency to that kind of evaluation right now, because if for no other reason than you can do it more cost effectively, but you don't need somebody of the training that a law enforcement officer has to do many of these things. However, what I think is more emerging in law enforcement today is looking in areas like mental health, homelessness, substance abuse, and those kinds of issues, which Salt Lake City has and a unit that looks at that in a limited way on one shift, 5 days a week. That is an emerging practice that more agencies are looking at. It's included in the scope of work because you can expand that idea in Salt Lake City. So that's what we mean by core versus non-core functions.
I don't want to cut anyone else off if they have an idea, but I guess my question to you is, because our schedules are just a little bit different and yours is going to come due before our recommendations, at least all of our recommendations are final. So of all those scope items you identified, where do you see our input being most useful, or how can we be most efficient as a body in giving you useful feedback in a short time frame?
Yeah.
I mean, we've collected a lot of data. We have some sort of early recommendations. One of our subcommittees is ready to do some more final recommendations. But what do you see those opportunities for us to give feedback within all of those things you're doing?
Yeah, well, I certainly see it very valuable in the police accountability and the police support areas, which look at the personnel management things and policy types of things that I talked about. So all of that very important. So the mechanism for that, we need to understand what you're doing. We want to support what you're doing. You've got good ideas that can help, that this process can help bring to fruition as well. So whatever makes sense, I would like to reach out in an individual way besides this this commission meeting today and any subsequent ones that we can have, so we can find out more about what you're doing and have a discussion about that. So if that's talking to the chair, the core members, subcommittee members, because I know you've got subcommittee, I'm open to whatever makes sense.
And if you're able to stick around a little bit after your presentation, there will be some recommendations that will be presented that will have budget implications. So it'll give you some idea of some of the work being done.
Right.
Good evening. Pardon me. Good evening. I'm Commissioner Powell. I'm on the youth subcommittee. I was one of the demonstrators that was out for multiple weeks following the call for racial equity protests across the country. I would like to go over an article by the Salt Lake Tribune real quick that really kind of, I think, covers the demands of the constituency we're here to represent, as well as to keep the same energy and momentum put forward on the street level by the people that are paying through their tax dollars willingly to our government and to our police protection force, who we trust to protect our communities. And by I mean our communities, I mean all of our communities, not just ones in particular area codes. There were 800 protesters that took to the streets, marching from the state capitol to the federal building to the courthouse and the Galvin Center to decry racism and call for systematic change. And that week's Tuesday night City Council public comment period, it lasted for hours. Most speakers asked for the council to defund the Salt Lake City Police Department. They asked for that money to be spent instead on social services, such as housing, public transit, and mental health care. And they spoke out against discrimination and police violence. The commenters also added some new demands. They wanted justice for Bernardo Palacios Carbajal, the Salt Lake City man who was shot more than 20 times by police on May 23rd, body cam footage shows. They wanted those officers fired, and they wanted them to be charged with murder. They wanted Chief Mike Brown to step down. Some wanted the police department to be abolished entirely. So my comment is, as commissioners of the constituency we represent, especially I as a young person on the youth subcommittee, what are you doing and who is on your team to actively engage in light of the racial equity and policing protests? Who is on your team who's racially qualified with that lens that Dante thus brought forward earlier? And who can really feel that impact on more than just a degree level, on a job level, on a core level, on a humanitarian level? My main concern is when we start talking about funding, we become very removed from what our main focus and effective goal is. And I can give you a brief idea as to what the positive spectrum of the things were. And do I think Chief Brown should step down? No, I do not. It's not my belief, but it was spoken at the city council meeting, and I'm reiterating the concerns of everyone and everything. Salt Lake City Council reconsiders police funding to housing, to mental health and services, to education, to street repairs, and emphasis on street repairs, please. The West Side has many potholes. Petition, and commission leadership, as the mayor has established, according to the Obama Foundation's commitment she signed on to, we are taking the proper steps gladly. But I just want to make sure that we as commission members are accurately bringing in professionals and making sure we're doing this in a timely manner, because the work we do as a commission is already pretty drawn out, and to the extent what we can do. So I would just like to reiterate who's on your team, and if you could give us more insight on that, please. Thank you.
Well, I think the best response I can give you is that this is our business of not just looking at the staffing needs, and in this case, the budgetary needs of the police department, but looking at it from a racial equity lens. And our experience with working with police departments, including especially in the last year, working with community groups and with stakeholders to make sure that there's racial equity and justice in policing, is an important part of what we do for our government clients.
And when you mean government clients, can I reiterate the concern that government clients in this aspect do represent taxpayers? Mm-hmm. As the governmental entity you are representing or affirming to look into is a taxpayer-based program. So I just want to reiterate, one of the main things Chief Brown got rid of after the protest was tear gas. I think we have a long way to go from there.
Mm-hmm. Good point. I think I would like to add to that, though, because I would want to be careful when we're talking about the ultimate client here, the taxpayer who pays for police services and consultants and other services like filling potholes. That our job is to make sure that the best, and I'll explain that in a second, services are being provided, in this case by the police department, to the community. And sometimes there's a cost component to that. Sometimes there is a role and responsibility and ethical component to that service as well. Our job is to be independent and objective consultants about that. And so we're not looking at it from the lens, even though there's these financial components to it, that this is in any way a cost-saving, motivated effort. This is a way to come to grips on what are important service issues within the community and how best to provide them. Hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So if I can follow up on mine and Commissioner Powell's question, which I think really speaks to the work that we're doing here. And you sort of spoke to it, but as it relates to racial equity and using a racial equity lens, can you describe how you do that and apply that to the work that you're doing in evaluating the budget?
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. So I was with you until you said the budget at the end, because remember there's these two components to it. So remember, this is essentially a 2-month study. So that constrains our ability to do what we do in many studies, where we are facilitating a process of community input. It's just too rapid a time. However, in this instance, there has been a number of processes that have gone on in parallel now with the Racial Equity and Policing Commission and other things that happened last year. So we get to benefit from that. And so when I mentioned that we reach out to stakeholders, including the representatives of this commission, we do it by proxy. And so we will continue a process over the next month of reaching out to you and to others to get input on issues that are germane to the question you just raised, and Mr. Powell and others.
So respectfully, if I can paraphrase, what I'm hearing you say is that there's no internal expertise for racial equity. You utilize the community and stakeholders to support you in trying to do that work.
No, I said in this instance, because it's a compressed time frame, we don't have the ability to have an extensive outreach effort as part of this study. But in other studies, that's what we do. For example, we're working in Austining, New York right now, where it's essentially a community facilitation process where we're working with a group of community stakeholders that was formed consistent with a state order to have this done in every community, to look at ways of reforming and reinventing policing. And so I counted them up just before this meeting. We had like 50 stakeholders in individual interviews. We had 250 people take part in community meetings, and we had the highest percentage response to a community survey that we've ever had to bring together a reform plan of about 35 recommendations to improve policing in the community. And that's typical of what we're doing. But we've got a different process here because of the need to redefine a budgetary process before the end of March.
Can I jump in for 1 second? I don't know if you guys had a chance to review the scope of our budget component that was provided to you. But one thing I want to make sure that you understand is that the work we're doing is really helping them set up a new budgeting approach and a way to categorize their existing costs, so that as policy decisions are made regarding issues regarding which services should be provided, which would be more informed by the work your group is doing, they have the tools that they need to know that those budgetary implications. So if you look at our scope, for example, we've not been asked to weigh in on should funds be redirected from policing to housing, policing to mental health, but it's to quantify what existing resources are placed towards current services. How do we know what services we're getting for those dollars? And then if we make policy decisions, what are the cost implications of those? So I think it's going to meld well with the work that you're doing, but it doesn't get to the same issues that you're tasked with looking at. So I just want to make sure that if you hadn't had a chance, you do have a chance to go look at that, because it is a little different focus on what you're doing. And I think from that, we still have to be cognizant of the issues you're talking about, but we're not going to be weighing in on some of the same issues that you will be recommending on the budgetary side.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions or thoughts?
I have one more singular question. Is there any insight into, like, is your team actively working with administration, SLCPD, and maybe Chief Brown can give more insight into this, but I know there's a lot of good programs within that department that already exist, and I think that have been established and well led through well leadership that I think at least the youth subcommittee is well aware of. And my insight and question is, are you, from starting a zero-based budget, are you putting any of these programs at risk at all? And if so, are you tightening their budgets? Because the last thing I'd want to do as a commissioner is to impact these community-based programs and initiatives while you are starting this.
I think Alan could say some more about this, but certainly on the budgetary side, we're not putting so much of value on that as defining what those organizational units are and providing some way in the future to evaluate them based on the services that they're providing and the work that they're doing.
So yeah, so maybe one example I could use maybe will help help everyone understand the work that we're going to be doing and how it might relate to the work that you're doing is, so for example, let's take school resources officers, because everyone's familiar with that sort of a program. We're making sure that we have helped the department fully quantify the cost of providing that service, understand what outcomes they're getting from that investment of funds, and enabling a framework so the policy decisions can be made. If we want to increase that by 1, 2, 3, or 4, what's the cost? What would be the outcome? If we wanted to reduce it in half, what would be the cost savings? What would be the outcome from that? So that as those policy decisions that you guys are, as a commission, are really weighing in on, you have the ability through this model to know that financial impact relatively quickly. But on the budget side of this, we are not recommending specific policy answers to those, but we're setting the framework up so as the council is getting input from your group, from others, and they're tackling these policy decisions, they have a comfort level that they know that whatever costs they are adding or removing are sufficient to provide that service, or are true savings that could be redirected to something else. So I hope that clarifies a little bit how we're feeding in on the budgetary piece. And so I think, you know, for the concern that you mentioned, it's not going to, I think, hamper anything you're doing. It's not going to hamper any of the existing programs. It's just setting the framework up for those critical policy discussions at a later point.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other thoughts before we move on?
I have a question, Dante, if that's all right.
Sure.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for giving us a perspective on the work that you're doing. I agree that there can be some crossover in the work that we're doing, and I think we can augment or provide a perspective that Commissioner Powell and facilitator Dante James are discussing. I am curious, though, if you all have additional data or measurables we haven't seen that might apply to some of our subcommittee groups, and what the relationship we can have to have those discussions. As an example, Mr. Pennington, we do have a school safety committee, and I think it would be valuable for that group in making recommendations to have some of those discussions. Other areas are policy and procedure, where we're looking at ensuring that accountability for officers is in place, which is obviously right in line with your evaluation of internal affairs. And I think the same is true for training, particularly some ideas that we have may cost money and help us prioritize those types of recommendations. So I definitely think if you're all able to join us in some of those subcommittee meetings, that might be a valuable conversation, and maybe even an opportunity for us to digest what your work is that scope of work that you just described, and for you all to kind of see some of these questions and comments, you know, the passion and the drive for involvement that comes from this commission, and then we can have more deep conversations. So I really value that invitation, and I think that's ideal. I also think meeting with those core commissioners is a good idea, and individual interviews. I see you have a super compressed timeline, so maybe I'm not sure the best way to facilitate that. Dante or core commissioners, if we can start an email exchange, so we don't have to wait another week, because I think the end of March you guys have some deliverables. If I'm looking at your schedule,
Correct.
Anyway, few ideas. So anyway, but bottom line, thank you, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you. I like the idea about working with the subcommittees.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Commissioner. Allison?
Hi, I'm Allison Rowland from the council office. I just wanted to mention Commissioner Angela Worden that we are here to try to facilitate that kind of thing. I think that would probably be the easiest way, is to let us as staff set up any of those interactions so that everyone is not flooded by more emails. That makes sense.
Thank you for that leadership. I'm throwing out an idea, and I appreciate you making it actionable. Thank you.
That's the problem with being a visionary. You just don't consider all the drama that you create. So appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Pennington, Mr. Brady. We appreciate your participation in your presentation today and the work that you're doing, and hope that we can certainly best inform you as it relates to racial equity and improved outcomes in the city in the work that you're trying to do for the police department and for the entire city. So much appreciate you being here this evening.
Thank you. We appreciate that too.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Well, let me pause. Anyone on the phone for any community questions or input? Larry?
Dante, there's nobody on the public line. I was told that there might be a citizen here in Zoom, but I don't know if it's the time for that kind of public comment.
Yeah, why don't we do it now and see? So if there is, are there any community members on the line that wish to be heard?
See, we have a citizen named Patricia Christensen on the line.
Okay, Ms. Christensen, please.
I'm just monitoring.
Just monitoring, she says.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. All right, then, until the next person, let's move into then the committee reports. So why don't we start with, as always, Youth Subcommittee. You're on mute, my friend. Chief would say that's $1.
Would Dati or Mahadir like to give the Youth Subcommittee report today?
Mother, do you want to give the report? I think you should probably go for it. You can do it.
You guys can go ahead.
I was like, MJ, you have it.
I got you. So yesterday we had a meeting to discuss the announcement of the zero-based budget protocol, and that's something Ephraim and I began a little earlier in the year with another fellow college student of ours from the West Side community. And after meeting with legislators at the state level, such as Representative Hollins, Luza Mismuya, and Angela Romero, we were able to establish that the most effective change to help our community and the youth on the West Side community is to have state mandated change when it comes to funding. Also, we were very pleased. I actually cannot comment on that because that's for our private meeting, but the Youth Subcommittee is very impressed with the additions being added to the SRO Subcommittee and believe that the state to citywide connection is very strong. There's a lot of room for us to start our work there. Additionally, we also would like to express a little more concern about the pace at what we feel like we're moving. We would like to make sure that the focus of what we're doing is being aimed at our community, and to reiterate that we do not want to harm officers by starting a zero-based budget, but we also do not want to get into a conversation again of rewarding officers, as this commission was formed from the actions of those protesting and expressing their disconcern with not what only happened nationally and has happened nationally, but what happened here locally, and to prevent those future incidents and to help both our officers and our community members. We're just asking that we remain focused and we maybe even bump up our meeting schedule among our subcommittee meetings, because we feel like this is pertinent. And thank you. If Dati, Ephraim, or Mahadir would like to add any of their personal comments, I would strongly encourage them to do so.
If I could jump in, another thing we wanted to kind of, Commissioner Romero here, just something we wanted to also discuss was kind of how we have Moises directly as kind of like our supervisor on the youth subcommittee. Something we would like is to kind of have a rotating position as that, so we can have kind of more open discussions with everybody in the main commission, so we can kind of hear a mix of views, kind of mix our views with them and get a better understanding of everyone's work.
Thank you, Commissioner Romero. And Commissioner Powell, much appreciated. And just maybe just a follow-up question, Commissioner Powell, you mentioned you as in the youth subcommittee, you kind of a discomfort with the pace of how this is moving. Any thoughts or suggestions on improving that?
I would recommend, like, not to be frank, but I think there was more frustration based as to where we as students are. I mean, I know I'm a full-time university student, and I know Ephraim's a full-time president as well as a full-time university student. And I know Dati is working really hard at West High School. And I know we were invited to this, and we're very privileged to be here. Our first objective is to learn and to observe. Our second objective is to apply our passion. And I think the frustration starts to build when we get caught in this revisiting cycle of our limitations, and then not even having a base model to base, like we don't have data. And that's been a huge issue as well. I've revisited that with Josh and or Commissioner King and the Policies and Practices Committee multiple times. And the meetings with SLCPD have been very helpful and beneficial, especially with administration and training officers. But then again, I see a disconnect in the way we're trying to establish the role and responsibility of law enforcement. And especially this month, I think emboldening the concept of how we can assess the history, culture, and also budget of our local police department, and how we can make this Black History Month a true Black History Month here locally. And we're told time after time that finances take time, but we saw executive orders take moments. And I do have a concern that we are on a time clock. Political tensions are high. There is a lot of stuff going on at the national level, and young people are still restless. So I would like to make sure that we're all still, and I don't mean to stand on my soapbox here, but the reason I'm talking for so long is because we talked for an hour and a half last night about this very concept. So I'd like to reiterate that we just would like to maybe see as an offer, homework, like are people actually reading these things we're sending out in emails? Commissioner, I don't want to pronounce her last name wrong, but Locke, she's sent out countless emails and has been helpful. Commissioner King has done that as well. But it seems that like the email chain ends there a lot of times outside of our meetings. And I feel like that's a strong disconnection as towards the proactive work we need to do as commission members.
Thank you, Commissioner, and with much respect to the passion that you bring and the youth subcommittee brings, I think it's invaluable. And I would suggest that it is that passion and commitment to this that fuels all of us in doing this work. When we see you, the youth subcommittee, who are all students who are all doing, what you're doing, trying to move into the next phase of your lives, giving so much of your life and time to this, and we truly appreciate it. I would suggest that that data is forthcoming. And I know that there's been some specific data that was asked even last week. And so I know data is forthcoming depending upon what the specific request was, but I know that's also an important component to this. And without a doubt, I appreciate your charge and challenge to all of the other commissioners to do their work and do their homework and read their emails and read the data that gets submitted, because the chief and his staff are doing their work to get us the data. We have to read it to be able to use it and inform the work that we do. So much appreciated for that. Any question, thought, comment for the youth report? Commissioner?
Question, Dante.
Yes, sir.
We have before us Legislative Hollins's bill. Is there any recommendation from the youth committee related to that bill?
I'm not sure if we can, for legal reasons, speak on that now. Is it still a protected bill? We are in a public discussion period. I just want to reiterate that.
I don't know, and our city attorney is unavailable this evening, so if there is some question, I would pause it and wait to see if we can get an actual determination on whether we should or shouldn't speak on it.
I apologize, Commissioner Davis. I will call you personally to discuss this on a personal matter, and we will affirm your answer for you. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. School Safety Committee report. Siobhan?
Sorry, took me a minute to get to the unmute button. School Safety Subcommittee is, sorry, I have a child coming. Does anybody else want to give this report in my stead? If not, I will go quickly. Again, we're similar to where we were last time we met as a full commission. We've identified lots of different areas that we spend some time just making sure that we're focused on the things that we want to be focused on as a subcommittee, and that when we get to the end of the road that we will be at the outcomes that we're looking to get to. So to that end, we have we've met with the school board members. We're hoping to meet with the superintendent in the coming week, and as well as thank you to Chief Brown and his assistant chief, who are giving us direct access to their data analyst to just make sure that we are getting the data we need to make the decisions and bring our draft recommendations to final. And also thanks to city staff who did begin the work to extend the time frame of the current MOU until our work is complete, so that our recommendations can be placed into any future MOU or considered in future action. So that's where we're at. We expect we'll have some interim recommendations in a final format here to bring to this full commission in very soon. I don't know about the next meeting, hopefully the next meeting, if not the following. Anybody, I invite my group to chime in if I missed anything that's key, as I was had a, in case you didn't notice, had a 5-year-old in my ear, so that wasn't my best work.
Can I say something really quickly?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Reverend Davis, going back to your question about the bill, I just double checked and the bill is public now. It's HB 345. The subcommittee has reviewed it. And one of the major suggestions we had was including student feedback in SRO selection. I think that's probably one of the greatest ways to create community investment, especially because SROs are governing the students within our schools. So that was our primary recommendation, but thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
I also provided feedback on that bill. I looked through it this afternoon and provided a list of suggestions, including adding definitions. There were no definitions in the language, and some of those terms such as referral and disciplinary action can be interpreted in very many different ways. I just thought of how many I could think of in different ways that term could be interpreted. And then I noticed there was no indication of how an SRO program ends, if ever. What's the end goal in sight? Is there an end goal with an SRO? Is there, once an SRO meets the program meets the goals of the MOU, does that end? Do we transition to something else? So I don't know if that was an appropriate set of terms to include in the bill, and I indicated that, but something to keep in mind that our SRO is going to be in our schools in perpetuity, or are they just something for a specific stated time frame? Those are my two big suggestions and discussion points.
Thank you. Policies, practices, subcommittee.
Yeah, thank you. Share my screen here if I can. And in the interest of time, just provide an overview of where we are. And this, I think, will be welcoming to, there we go, Commissioner Powell, who was unable to attend our subcommittee meeting on Wednesday last week. However, prior to that and at the meeting, we made some progress specifically around.
You're not sharing a report. You're just sharing all of us on our screen here.
We all look good twice, though. So.
I think you've discovered infinity, Josh.
Okay. Are you seeing it now?
That's better.
All right. Thanks, Larry. That would have been embarrassing if you let me go on for 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. All right. So around data, just again, I'll try and be brief in the interest of time, but since the prior subcommittee meeting and we made these recommendations, the chief has engaged us and then it's on our call last time. And so have some direction here that we'll be pursuing. There was a request that the commission has provided the same access to data and information as the CRB. Chief Brown said that's possible, and with a background check, and we talked through the process of that. More importantly, we considered or talked about what information do we actually want and if that's the best method to access that data. However, there is a process to get that clearance and police department support in moving through that process. Second, the subcommittee requested data on outcomes and impacts from the mayor's executive order governing use of force. Nutshell, Chief Brown mentioned that's readily available. There are different data points or data points that to consider, and recommended that through Assistant Chief Doubt, we set up a meeting to work with the analytics team and identify specifically what data we'd like and look at the exact methods of gathering the data and what we want to track So the next step will be in the coming days to set that up with the department and identify the data we want to hone in on and track that and compare it with Assistant Chief Stout. And then MJ, we can follow up if you want to be involved in that. Commissioner Andrew Weirden volunteered to attend that meeting and with the analytics team.
I'd be very grateful to attend that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Again, recommendation to leverage the planned cultural assessment mentioned in the crime control plan. Again, Chief Brown and Chief Doubt mentioned that that'd be excellent, and they were looking forward to integrating that survey such as the one that Commissioner Shiflett had shared. And so we're looking at setting up that call, another meeting with Chief Doubt, to look at those questions and identify from that Pew survey what we want to keep and what additional questions we might include. And so the survey can be deployed as part of that cultural assessment. I think the Matrix group mentioned this might be part of their scope, but Chief, next meeting will speak to the subcommittee more on policies governing the police department's relationship with other agencies. And we'll be working throughout the week to have a good discussion next week on that. Again, Matrix group mentioned their work around body worn cameras, and the work they do will help in our discussion. We had a discussion about looking at that and the financial impacts associated with such a policy. And so we look forward to their report and information to help inform the subcommittee's review of the body worn camera policy. It's specifically the activation of the camera full time. The rest of these subpoints falling under this can be tied into the next recommendation and update, and that is for our subcommittee to utilize our thought partners, Pepperdine, to help assist some of the policies and practices we're looking at and want to review and have a tentative date to meet with them February 24th, 4 to 5. Final point, there was discussion in our subcommittee and then offline between Dante and I on recruitment and retention. And I know Dante's subcommittee's been looking at that as well. And we had discussion around where best that might fit in, where we can give it some due diligence and time. And Dante can pick it up here, but we made the determination that would best fall in the training subcommittee and aligns with some of their initiatives and recommendations they're looking at.
Thank you, Josh. Questions for the Policies and Practices Subcommittee?
And there are a couple others, but I can share those out with the minutes in the interest of time and perhaps boredom some might have in policies and practices. Thanks, Dante.
Thank you, Josh. And finally, the training subcommittee. As Josh said, we will be picking up and looking into the recruitment and hiring processes of Salt Lake City PD. It's our understanding that there is an upcoming class that's already been hired. As I recall, the chief or lieutenant said that particular class, incoming class, is made up of 30% diverse candidates. I don't know what that looks like, but it was described as 30% candidates of color. So we will be taking a look at those processes moving forward. And then most importantly, this subcommittee has finalized its recommendations that it wants to be able to move toward to City Council and the mayor as just those interim recommendations. And so Commissioner Sagatamalga is going to present those on behalf of the subcommittee, and then we would ask the full commission for its approval and acceptance of these as initial set of final recommendations from the full commission, not just the subcommittee, but from the full commission that'll be moved forward toward the mayor and the city council. So I'm going to share my screen and the commissioner will take it and go.
Can I just have one just point of process before you
Sure.
can jump into that? We have school safety has a meeting with the data analysts at the police department next week, and if it's useful, we would be willing to share that meeting time with other subcommittees in the name of efficiency. It's next Wednesday at 2:00. So if anybody has interest in jumping in on that opportunity, since it's already set up to understand that data reporting, etc., just wanted to put that out there. That just shoot me an email and I'm happy to add you to the appointment.
Thank you. Maybe that can just be sent out to all the commissioners to put on their calendars for remembrance. So thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And so there's a total of, well, 3 large areas and a set of recommendations underneath that. So this is the first one. Commissioner?
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. I do want to give a special thank you to Police Chief Mike Brown and his team and the city staff and the Langdon Group for providing all these reports and data so that we can make these recommendations. The first one is a demographic concern related to field training officers. Out of 67 current FTOs, we only have 6 people of color in those positions. 2 are Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, and 4 are Latino. That's definitely a concern for us. There are currently no targeted outreach efforts to ensure or improve the diversity of the program. It is designed for self-selection to apply for the program. And so what we would like to recommend is we like to create a process for targeted outreach to officers of color to increase the diversity of the program. Okay, and the second recommendation that we have now is training concerns related to the crisis intervention team training. The issues that we're seeing is training is not prioritized, nor data specifically captured for lateral hires. What we're hearing is that everyone who comes into the academy, all police officers are CIT trained, but that's not completely accurate. I mean, that is accurate, but it's not accurate that all Salt Lake PD are receiving crisis intervention training. So if you're coming from another county or out of state, if you are a transfer and your police department doesn't require that, then you're not CIT trained. Recertification for this is also voluntary. What we're seeing is that not all our officers are choosing to recertify. There's also an insufficient budget to enlarge the program. So yes, we would like to see every single officer who comes through Salt Lake PD, regardless of if they're lateral or coming from another department, that they are CIT certified and recertified, but we need budget for that. And currently 189 officers have chosen to recertify. We have 272 officers who have chosen not to recertify. And so our recommendation for this is that we require CIT recertification for all officers, require CIT certification for all lateral hires, an increased budget to complete this priority, an increased budget to CIT to provide for more officers to cover more than one shift, and have sufficient staffing to cover when officers are unable to work their shift. What we're hearing now is that at any given time, there are maybe 2 to 3 officers who are on leave. So we actually only have 1 CIT detective on shift. And so we'd like to prioritize and fill these detective positions over other specialty assignments to ensure quality response and to add additional expertise and relief to emergency mental health calls.
And if I might, before we move to the next one, I have to acknowledge that last week in conversations with Chief Brown, Chief Dowd, and others, Chief Dowd said he had just signed an order from his office requiring all officers to become CIT certified. So he said that based upon this recommendation, he wasn't going to wait till it became official or, goes through city council or the mayor, but he in fact sign the order to ensure that all officers will be CIT certified. So much respect and appreciation for that movement.
Okay, and our third recommendation, we have some training concerns related to equity, implicit bias, and community policing curriculum in the academy and in-service training. The issues that we're seeing is there are no Salt Lake City community-based facilitators of color in the academy or in-service training. There is no competent component of the academy that provides the history of Salt Lake City and its communities of color. The current number of hours dedicated to DEI implicit bias training in the academy is insufficient to embed an equity lens and consciousness throughout the organization. So essentially, we have police officers out there right now who are serving our community. Okay. Essentially, we have police officers out there right now who are serving and policing our community without a true understanding of our community. And it's well known that in order to serve others, to truly serve one another, it needs to come from a place of understanding. And so these are important components that are missing from training. And so our recommendations are that the Salt Lake City community-based trainers of color, there needs to be Salt Lake community-based trainers of color to be a part of the academy and the in-service training team. We'd like a requirement that equity curriculum that is best practice and that is co-created with a community-based trainer, a requirement that recruits learn the history of the diverse communities in Salt Lake City, and required increased budget allocation to provide additional professional diversity, equity, and inclusion training.
Thank you, Commissioner. So those are the three recommendations that we have. And so I would suggest that we take them one at a time and ask for your response, acknowledgement, questions, thoughts on them individually, and then ask for approval of them in total. So let's just start with number one, the recommendation to create a targeted outreach program for officers of color to increase the diversity of those who are in the field training officer program, which is the program that takes officers right out of the academy and then basically does the on-the-job training, if you will, for them once they get on the street. So commissioners, I'll ask your thoughts on that first recommendation.
Good idea.
I can't see everybody, so please just speak up. Reverend Francis? Or Reverend Davis, I'm sorry.
Good idea.
Thank you. Thoughts, questions?
I'm all for the idea.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'm all in. Commissioner Salazar Hall.
Thank you.
So I have a question around this. We have had some discussions in different groups around recruitment and the lens of equity in recruitment. So let's say we're talking to the refugee population who may come in as highly qualified from other countries, but may not have the English speaking skills at that level and so on. And a lot of times they get rejected in these positions and so forth. This is the community feedback that I've heard. So there has been an ask to say that the qualification part of recruitment needs to be more equitable. Not only just sending out information into diverse populations about hiring, but also providing opportunities to compensate for our skill set.
Thank you, and an excellent recommendation. Although that's not quite specific to this recommendation, that would be something we would certainly take up as it relates to recruitment and hiring. This is specific to those being officers who are already been hired, been through the academy, and are now being taken under the wing of those field training officers. So this particular recommendation is specific to those field training officers who are already police officers in Salt Lake City. Okay, so since I can't see everyone, I'll just ask for a voice approval. So then I will ask all commissioners who are in favor of this recommendation, please say aye.
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 And those opposed, please say aye. Okay, so that recommendation is approved. So moving to recommendation number, well, it's under area number 2, there's a set of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 recommendations. Require CIT recertification for all officers, require CIT certification for all lateral hires, increase the budget to ensure that there is more than one detective who is available to work on any given shift, prioritize and fill these detective positions over other specialty assignments like SWAT or K9 to ensure quality response and to add that additional expertise and relief to emergency mental health calls. Thoughts or questions on these particular recommendations?
Maybe instead of having it increase budget, maybe have funds reallocated to this specific training to get this done. Instead of increasing it, maybe see if we can reallocate some of the money first.
I agree.
Other thoughts, commissioners?
The subcommittee provided budget classification and all the information before they made this recommendation.
Yes, we did receive the budget that CIT has to be able to provide its services, yes. And it's a very minimal budget.
Okay, and the subcommittee still feels that additional funds should be allocated.
Without question, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Dante, is item 1 and 2, could that be the same item? All officers, including laterals?
We specifically wanted to call out laterals because currently there's a lack of data to know, in fact, how many or if lateral hires are even certified. So we wanted to specifically call out lateral hires.
Thank you.
Dante, on a process matter, I just wanted to chime in. So we had a couple of commissioners say that they may want to have this reworded. So I just want to figure out the best way for us to have the subcommittee respond to that or figure out how that could be incorporated.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any thoughts? I guess in our thinking anyway, maybe it was an assumption that increasing the budget would naturally have to decrease something else because their budget is finite. It's not like they're getting additional dollars to do this, but that may be an incorrect assumption. And certainly Matrix can speak to that or others, but that was our assumption, Commissioner. So maybe the word reallocate, or maybe they both need to be there, increase and or reallocate budget to complete this priority.
I think that your assumption mirrors a lot of our hopes. But I think that with the word solely being increase budget, it kind of leaves room open. And I mean, I know this recommendation isn't necessarily legally binding, but I feel like it is. We do still want to be cognizant of letter versus spirit / intent.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Dante,
yep.
I just think that for me, this is such an important part that community needs, that, for me, it's whether it's reallocated or straight out increase, I would support either.
Okay.
Because I want some good professionals out there being able to work with our community members with disabilities.
Thank you.
So then, just to chime in, Commissioner Salazar here, if that's the direction, which is fine, I have no problem with that at all. Just to make sure there's no confusion as to our intent of what we want to do. The proper way to do it would be to say increase or reallocate budget to complete this priority. The or necessarily includes and in legalese. And that may be sufficient to let the city council and the mayor's office know what we were intending.
Okay. Commissioners who raised the question, is that acceptable?
Yeah, I think for now, I guess, reallocate and or increase, but I think we should have a bigger, just, emphasize really that we more specifically want to reallocate before we give anything more.
Okay.
Would echo that.
So I can add parentheses with an emphasis on reallocation. Would that be?
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. This is Commissioner Hawkins.
Please.
Where would you reallocate from? What department are you thinking?
Well, none in particular right now. Kind of as the matrix groups goes over kind of the budget and sees where maybe they could loosen some here and there. Like we don't know the budget completely. We only got the CIT budget and only got to review that, but the matrix groups will definitely help us kind of see where that could possibly be. Kind of here, it does kind of, like we said, emphasize reallocating. And if that's not necessarily possible, increasing could be an option, but we'll see where to possibly reallocate it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
In terms of reallocation, I think we were looking at ideas such as more community-based policing ideas that don't necessarily always involve law enforcement. So piggybacking off of that CIT team and idea, I think we also maybe have like more park rangers, such as people that are at Liberty Park, maybe during the busy hours out of the day, especially in the summertime, that can patrol the park and de-escalate situations and deal with the homeless. I know simple things like that, or City Creek Mall has its own version of community policing, and I know Chief Brown probably knows that very well. Salt Lake City Police Department was probably in City Creek every other day while I worked there as a server, just to have to maybe like remove someone that the security were having to remove, disturbing persons, like people stealing things. And I think that like mall cops effectively do their job without like having any tools that need to necessarily escalate situations. And I think if we saw more of that in community environments, we would need, it would also address the staff protocol of the department and the response time issue, because they are stretched thin. I think they could respond to more important calls if we had more qualified people to be involved in community policing measures.
Thank you. And maybe just as a bigger FYI for the full commission, we're not going to send this just these 3 pages. There will be a cover letter that describes the process by which we achieve these recommendations and the intent of these, so which would then on some level describe what you're describing. Commissioner Romero, also that the goal is not to just continue to add more money, but to look at reallocation in the best way possible. And so there will be intent in the cover letter that goes along with these, so that hopefully we'll begin to address some of these But there'll also be more opportunities for recommendations, just like Commissioner Palmer.
That's really good to hear. Just kind of going back to what Rogelio was saying, and to hopefully help answer Commissioner Hawkins' question. I think it's not so much about figuring everything out internally within the police department right now. I think at the end of the day, our position kind of stems from the truth that the police budget is part of the city budget. And so if we can figure out how to reallocate things internally within the police department, then that means that's potentially more money that could go towards community programs outside of the police department, is kind of where we're coming from.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Could I add one quick thing?
Yep.
I was just going to ask of the subcommittee, how important it is to their recommendation for the increase or reallocation of budget piece to be there as compared to just the outcome of completing the priority of certification and recertification and providing for more officers to cover more than one shift and sufficient staffing. I mean, it just seems to me like that's the area of most significance at this point. And given that there's so much work being done on the budget, it may be that, that component of this could benefit from, additional discussion as more information comes to light. But I don't want to strip the recommendation of its power either. So I just wanted to test that to see if that was extremely important or something that could be, held in sort of a back pocket.
For me, and I'm a member of the subcommittee, I feel like this is an important recommendation now because it's actionable now. And it's action we can take as a commission that, if it's accepted, can be implemented, quite frankly, right now by reprioritizing the way the current budget is being utilized. And I feel strongly that we get more services through an existing program to more members of our community, in part because mental health services disproportionately impact communities of color. And I want to start to address that immediately by having those services more broadly across the department. And I also think it can reduce the number of traumatic outcomes. And quite frankly, if these mental health cases are managed effectively, it can reduce the number of patrol calls. So I think it can be effective in a number of ways. And I wonder if I could recommend on the language that we suggest that we reallocate the current budget to prioritize additional officers, or detectives on multiple shifts, and evaluate the program in the zero-based budgeting for its effectiveness down the road. And I think in that way we can capture some of the concerns that I'm hearing about prioritizing things before we understand if we want to add more to the budget or what that zero-based budgeting is going to look like. However, we can take action right away to provide more services. So I think if we use language like that, we can meet some of the concerns that I've heard from commissioners about not prioritizing a budget increase, but that we could use current budgeting to get something actionable now. There's another call I'm hearing from this commission is that we're frustrated waiting to act. And I think this could be a substantial step to put critical resources in a place to really help people in a critical way in the community. I've articulated myself more accurately than I did when I originally put this idea out. But that's a suggestion, I think, where we can balance out the interests of this conversation and still have an actionable recommendation.
So you would like to restate that, I'm guessing?
Reallocate the budget to complete that priority and consider its long-term funding in a zero-based budget exercise.
I'll write it and then folks can consider it and consider zero-based
For your consideration.
in the long term. In the long-term budgeting process.
Thanks for indulging me there, Commissioner. I just wanted to help you all move it forward.
So is
Steve, does that look right?
Yeah, is this what you were saying, Commissioner?
I'm okay with it. Others may resist that first word increase, to leave that in that second area, so reallocate current budget and consider zero-based budgeting in the long term. I'll let others weigh in on that.
Other thoughts, please?
Sounds good.
Sounds good to me also. Oops. Yeah, it sounds good to me also. I thought I was muted.
I just have one addition to that. When we, seems like a lot of discussion is about this program, but perhaps if we also prioritize and fill detective positions along with civilian positions, adding civilians in that is a lower cost and actually more expertise in mental health.
I second that idea.
So
You mean the mental health professionals that go along with them, right, Marianne?
Yeah. So underneath number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, prioritize and fill the detectives positions over other specialty assignments and concurrent civilian positions and civilian mental health professional positions.
Let's try that, see how that looks.
I forget the and. Is that what you were wanting it to read, Commissioner Suarez?
I think you need to take out the over other specialty assignments because it makes it look like you're saying detective positions over other specialty and civilian mental health.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right. Okay. Police their positions. Okay. Then that removes the thought process that Commissioner Jordan had. So I can put the over other specialty positions after the mental health positions, and I think that would clarify it.
Or you could put it in parentheses after detective positions.
Okay.
No. Wouldn't that be the same thing as it was before then? I like what you said, Dante, at the end, after the mental health.
What she's saying, the parentheses sets it off, but I think it still fits okay afterwards. Over other positions. How's that? Or is that still in the wrong place? Commissioner Salazar Hall's going to tell me it's in the wrong place.
I think it goes before the description to ensure quality response.
Well, I was thinking it would go right after detective positions so that it's applied to that specific law enforcement detective class.
I think she's correct because the parentheses applies to what's right in front of it. And then this is a separate phrase.
Those lawyers probably know what they're talking about.
I mean, I do make a living drafting contracts essentially to keep people from going to court.
So, commissioners, yay, nay, other thoughts, wordsmithing?
If we could just do the same thing we did with reallocate, add that to the others, the fourth section, the fourth recommendation, just add increase and or reallocate with the consider the zero-based budget long-term, just add it to the fourth one as well.
Okay.
Not to counter Commissioner Rogelli or Romero's comment, but may I make a proposition of reprioritizing, as I think we do have a fiscal model of community-based programs already within the department that have been established. So I think if we reprioritize which areas the department is currently putting its money, like Commissioner Angie Warden already said, I think that would be a more effective use of language to wordsmith one more time.
For number 4, are you speaking of?
Yes.
So you would say reprioritize or prioritize and increase budget?
Was it increase or reallocate you were talking about, the third one,
Yes,
Commissioner Romero, or
yes.
the fourth one?
Well, he wanted to put the language from number 3 into number 4.
With
Yeah,
the with the exception of the the language being changed to reprioritization. I know it's wordsmithing, but I just don't want to repeat that same concept twice.
Okay, I get you. Yeah. So reprioritize budgets.
Reprioritizing budgets to CIT.
To provide more officers to cover.
Yeah, I don't want to knock out the system model we already have. I think that's critical to establish.
So it would be I don't know. Prioritize. Increase. Okay, so then this would disappear, is what you're suggesting. So it would read reprioritize budget to CIT, not increase.
Yes.
Commissioners, training subcommittee commissioners as well, it's your recommendation. Does it say the same thing in your mind?
The reason I add that word is because when you're allocating things, you're not always prioritizing your allocations. If you're putting all your resources in 30 different areas, you're not going to have an effective use of that resource. So I feel like we're getting, that's why I'm kind of using that train of thought. There is a difference.
Yeah.
Going once, going twice.
Dante?
Yes, sir.
Commissioners, do you care if I weigh in here just a minute? I appreciate your input, and I'm looking at the last two, and since these are going to come to me, I want to make sure that we're capturing or I understand what we're trying to get to. If we require CIT recertification for all officers, and we require CIT certification for all lateral hires, that means everybody working in patrol will be CIT certified, right?
Yes.
So 4 need to be there if everybody is already certified that's working in patrol?
I think this word is incorrect. So let me correct this word, which might answer your question for you.
Okay.
Is that better? Or does that clarify what the intent was anyway? It wasn't about the patrol officers being certified. It was having those specifically CIT trained detectives who are available to work with the social workers on that particular team.
So, okay, so you're talking about the CIT unit that works with the social workers.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, all right. That now And then the last
Chief,
one-
do you think we should put that in, like the CIT unit?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've been sitting here for 20 minutes watching that, and that was just my aha moment right there. So,
So if I did that, that would be a better,
yeah, for more detectives.
is that what the unit's called? Is it the CIT unit?
Or the core responder model unit, something like that. And now I know what we're talking about. We can get there.
Okay.
And do we need to change the other officers in that recommendation to detectives as well?
The very first one?
No. In the fourth one,
Okay.
have sufficient staffing to cover when officers
Thank
are
you.
unable to work should be detectives.
I'm a firm believer that a camel is a horse put together by a committee, but this is working, so.
That was my thought exactly.
Thank you, Dan Rather, for that colorful metaphor.
So are we now speaking the true intentions of these recommendations? Okay, so all those in favor of the 5 recommendations for area number 2, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. All right, moving to number 3, the 4 recommendations regarding the training academy and the in-service training and the curriculum, as well as including community-based, Salt Lake City community-based trainers to be a part of that academy. So these 4 recommendations. Thoughts, questions, wordsmithing?
I think item number 1 is essential, and that if we can achieve that, then I think we are a long ways toward our goal.
Thank you, Reverend.
May I recommend in the initial requirement of Salt Lake City community-based trainers of color to be a part of the academy and in-service training team? Can someone help me develop a word of language to introduce a connection to the already established civilian review board, who helps the chief and advises the chief, or maybe the chief's citizen advisory board? I think they would have a more introspective view of the department and officers within the department than maybe we would as a commission. So making the requirement more so that the advisory or citizen review board be part of that selection process.
Selection process for the trainer?
For selecting community-based trainers of color. That way, not that I think Chief Brown would ever just solely choose community-based trainers from the department that he didn't think were qualified, but for policy's sake of what we're working towards, to establish that there needs to be that independent requirement for community-based trainers to be a part of that program. If you see what I'm saying. So I don't want necessarily the police department to be solely, like administration within the department, to be solely responsible for picking the trainers of that program.
And Jay, so would you like it like in partnership with?
Yes.
So MJ, I agree with that. I'm on the citizen advisory board. So that's a great suggestion.
Thank you. Appreciate it, our Commissioner Hawkins.
Here's my question. Do you want to narrow it to just that group, or would you leave it open and say selected in partnership with community input or something like that?
I would like the Citizens Advisory Board to be specifically mentioned, as they are established co-independent, but like co-independent partner with the department right now. So like, I think they would have more of an introspective view. Again, we could be under the lens of community-based, right? But I think the department already has community-based trainers. I think we need to do the part of establishing, we need a policy for that. I think the department has a better view of who they could choose to really apply that work. You know, who's qualified to make sure that officer safety is going to be applied through that training as well. But who also has that co lens of being able to view it through a racial equity lens, right? So like officers of color, great option, but like a social worker trying to tell an officer how to handle a robbery suspect, there's pros and cons on both sides of that. That's my argument.
And I don't know, and Commissioner Hawkins, you can speak to that, because I certainly don't know enough about the Community Advisory Board and what that makeup is, what it looks like, what its role is. So Commissioner Hawkins can speak, or maybe other commissioners can speak to that being the specific requirement of partnership versus something broader. So I'll just leave it open for other commissioners to speak, or the chief for that matter.
So what we have, oh, sorry.
No, Commissioner Hawkins, you go first, please. That's great, thanks.
So what we have discussed is going through the training, talking to the trainers in the department. It's very important to us. So I believe what Commissioner Powell is saying is a great idea, wonderful idea, because we do know more about what's going on in the department than others. We will be setting up an appointment with oh my goodness, with the trainers to see the videos, how they train. So I think being selected by the Citizens Advisory Board would be the best idea. I believe sorry, Commissioner Powell is correct.
Okay, thank you. Other commissioners, thoughts?
Would it be possible then to put, you know, in partnership with CAB and or other community organizations, so it's not just to like that we actually, you know, bring them out, because it seems like there's a good argument to have them, but also have it open to other organizations as well. Would that? I'm a little bit troubled with only asking for one organization to do that selection process, although they do seem to be fairly qualified.
Yeah, and that's my only concern is that narrowness of who gets to help out select. That's all.
Right. Like
so what
the
other
Police
group
Civilian
would you?
Review Board would be like, that was one that jumped out at me, was the Police Civilian Review Board. And I agree with Moises. I'm sorry, Commissioner Prospero, about if we specifically name one, how many others are going to jump out and say, why didn't you include us?
Right.
My concern is if we open it up to everyone, who are we opening to get a part of that? Because I think validity is also a concern of this movement. BLM wants to be at that table. The Chicano movement wants to be at that table.
Right.
Pacific Islanders want to be at this table. The LGBTQ community wants to be at this table. So, I mean,
I agree.
like,
You don't want to open it up broadly and say everyone can be involved, because then you're not going to get anywhere. Agreed.
So
but,
in
go ahead, Commissioner Hawkins. Go ahead.
So in that advisory board, we have we're almost all representative. We have LGBTQ. We have Black. We have Latina. Oh my goodness. I'm not sure what she was. I believe Asian. So everybody's represented there. Is that correct, Chief Brown?
Yes, Commissioner Hawkins, we do have a very good cross-section of community members on that board. And we can certainly expand it to include more of the communities we're trying to represent as well. It's not limited in any way, so we can build that out if we need to. But it's been a good ally to the police department and to me for many, many years. And we have very hard conversations. In fact, I think what Commissioner Hawkins was talking today is in the listening session, we heard a community member talk about the community academy where they got up and walked out. And so we were talking about getting that curriculum, getting that video and reviewing exactly what was shown, and then have those conversations, should it be there. So this may be a good vehicle for exactly what I think what MJ's talking about, or Commissioner Powell's talking about. But they, like I say, it's a good cross section, and they're very committed.
Thank you. I guess I would ask, is there an indigenous, or is the indigenous community represented on that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So commissioners, I'm going to write it and tell me if you want me to do something else with it. So what is it? The civilian, what is it?
Advisory board?
Civilian advisory board, is that what it's called?
Yes.
So I'll just.
I apologize for holding up the group for so long. Thank you.
It's a good conversation, Commissioner. It's a good conversation.
Oh, yeah, you're fine. Thank you.
Anything else on the remaining recommendations?
So are we talking about the selection, the community members that will work with the training unit?
Yes.
And then they'll still have the ability to evaluate the training through that equity lens to ensure that cultural consciousness is embedded in all areas of training. So we'll still maintain that main function and use a recommendation for existing boards to support that selection process. And Jay, am I understanding that correctly? Commissioner Powell?
Yes.
Yes.
And with the co-creation of the equity curriculum, I think that will also be ensured on some level.
Thank you.
Okay. Going once.
Dante, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I'm clear on this again. Salt Lake City community-based trainers of color to be part of the academy and in-service training team. So are we talking members of our community involved in our training curriculum, actually training or training? Help me understand what these trainers will be teaching. Or go ahead, I'm ready.
As I understand the intent of the committee's recommendation, they will be co-training the equity curriculum as it gets built out in a co-creation model, and also be a part of the in-service component to assist in, I think, putting that equity lens on what is being provided.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. Thank you.
Subcommittee members, did I misspeak?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question about the budget allocation again.
Yes.
Would that mean the budget is allocated to the community trainers / organizations or to the police department?
To the department so that they could fund the additional coursework necessary to provide this training. Currently, there is 4 hours of training in the academy, which is just not sufficient.
Okay.
And so it would be to fund additional training to provide more depth and breadth to the work of equity in that training.
And I'm assuming that may include providing funds for these community trainers to come in and do the work, right?
Yeah, I would, yes. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Excellent. We have our first set of recommendations to go to council and the mayor. So thank you, commissioners. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can see some faces. I much appreciate this work. And, you know, wordsmithing is always a pain, but I think it ends up with a better product. And so much appreciated. So I recognize the time that it took to do that, and we are at 7 o'clock, but I don't want to forego the opportunity for the next item of business, which is to, one, say thank you to the chief and to Lieutenant Zayas for reaching out to members of the police community, police officers specifically, to discuss and gain their participation in participating here with the commission. And there are several on the call today. Some couldn't be on it, but several on the call today. And I'm not sure who all is on the call. I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Zayas for just a moment. But the idea is that we've spoken with the Corps commissioners who all agreed, the chief and lieutenant and the assistant chiefs, to come up with reaching out to specific officers they felt would be beneficial to this commission in being able to provide thinking, thoughts, responses, their opinions and thoughts on some of the work that goes forward in the subcommittees. And it gives an opportunity for that exchange of ideas, exchange of thinking. They're not going to be voting members. That's not the idea at all. But it allows this commission to hear from the officers who may in fact be most impacted by this, so that there can be a real exchange of ideas and exchange of hopefully understanding by the officers on the street that this commission isn't out to damage them or tarnish their reputations or cast any sense of allegation on how they do what they do, but to try to improve the outcomes for communities of color in this city and ensure that we can all be bought into that in the best way possible. And I hope I'm describing that accurately. But I'll just pause. Lieutenant Zayas, if you wanted to.
Thank you, Dante. I really appreciate it. We have 3 officers that were able to attend tonight. We have about 9 more who are also interested in being part of this program. So as we can make their schedules free, we'd like them to come and join the meeting so that you could meet them. I did send a bio of all those officers who are interested in participating in this to Dante. He'll get that out to you guys at a later date. I apologize, I'm a mom here too. Hold on, baby. So we had one officer that was on, but he had to go, Ricardo Franco. He is on duty, so I'm sure he had to attend to some calls. But we also have Officer Steve Masters, Officer Brendan Scott, and Officer Crystal Grady. If you 3 would turn on your microphones and unmute, I will turn the time over to you to say hello to the commission.
Mommy, I will chill. I promise.
That sounds like a commissioner right there, just for the record.
Officer Scott, I think you're unmuted.
All righty. I'm not sure what it is that you're looking for from me right now. An introduction, I guess.
Sure.
My name's Brendan. I've been an officer here for about 6.5 years. I currently work patrol. I've had multiple assignments, worked with the SWAT team. Currently, I've worked multiple years on our bike squad. On top of that, I have a collateral assignment, meaning I work part-time with our gang unit. I have a college degree in criminal justice and psychology from Weber State. I'm 32 years old. Love my job, even in the culture of policing now, which is why I think it's important that I really appreciate that we are able to at least give thoughts in regards to what's taking place. And I guess we can get into that further, but Yeah.
Well, thank you, Officer Scott. And I'm not sure if you think you turned your camera on, but you didn't. But if you could even maybe offer a couple of thoughts on what your interest is on being on this commission, that might be helpful.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm trying to stop my camera, but it's not working. So it worked for a second. I'm not sure what's going on, so I apologize about that. But I think when I first became a police officer, so I was really interested. You know, I didn't know what I wanted to do growing up. I took a lot of classes in college trying to figure that out. And ultimately I leaned obviously towards law enforcement for various reasons. And coming out of college and getting the opportunity to work for the police department here in Salt Lake, I remember my very first call through the hiring process. I used to get so frustrated that other people would get preference over me because of experience, whether that be military or previous experience with another department, stuff like that. When I felt I was equally qualified, having a college degree, speaking another language, I feel that I'm a pretty intelligent person. So I used to get super frustrated with that. I ended up getting the opportunity to work for Salt Lake. And I remember my very first call out of the academy, and it hit me why experience matters as a police officer, and why preference was made to hire other people over me with experience. And that's because it matters. And I think that that's something that I myself personally can lend, is I have experience as a police officer. I'm not a brain surgeon, so I can't go tell a brain surgeon how to do their job. That's just the bottom line. As a police officer, having multiple years of experience, having encountered multiple different types of incidents and calls, I have experience that a lot of you don't have. So I think that my input in regards to my experience is something I can absolutely offer.
Thank you.
Brendan is also a field training officer as well.
Great. Thank you, Lieutenant. Who else do we have?
Crystal or Steve?
Yeah, I'll hop on. Keep my light on here. Sorry. My name's Steve Masters. I've been with the Salt Lake City Police Department for 8 years now. During that time, I've had the opportunity to serve on patrol. That's where I currently am. I've worked the West Side Pioneer Division, the Central Division, and the Liberty Division. Currently, I'm assigned to the Central Division. I've also worked for a couple of years on our bike unit. I was one of the first officers on the West Side Pioneer bike unit. I had a lot of good experiences there. I'm a field training officer like Officer Scott. I've been a member of our public order unit, and I help train the tactics there. Variety of I'm adjunct as a defensive tactics instructor for our training unit, and I've helped out with a lot of the reality-based trainings for our department as well. I graduated from the University of Utah with a degree in Middle Eastern Studies. International Studies, Middle Eastern Studies, focused on that. I minor in Arabic. I lived over there for several years in Israel, actually. So it's given me kind of a bit of perspective. I grew up in Utah. My family was not very well off, so I had occasion to run into law enforcement, and most of my encounters were such that they left me feeling a desire to pursue that career. Ever since the age of 5, I've wanted to be a police officer, and it's led me here to Salt Lake City, which is it's been a privilege to serve here.
Thank you. And your interest in supporting or working with the Racial Equity and Policing Commission?
Yep. I was asked if I would be interested. I replied that I would be. I've always enjoyed getting to know other cultures better. Obviously, since I studied the Middle East and I lived over there, I've got some family ties to Nigeria and to the Middle East, and I've always wanted to. I try and see things through other people's perspective, and my experiences in the police department have led me to know that there's not always there's always two sides to every story, if not more. And so I'd like to bring, like Officer Scott, I'd like to bring my expertise to the table, but I'd also like to learn from you guys as well. I think that exchange of information gives us an opportunity to learn and grow, and hopefully do what's best for our community.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
I like your haircut.
High and tight, is that what that is?
I appreciate that. It's partly by choice, partly by necessity.
Is it Officer Grady?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Good evening. Just a few words on yourself and your interest in working with the Racial Equity and Policing Commission.
Okay. I started in corrections. I was there for 3 years. I assisted with our defensive tactics instructor team, along with the crisis intervention team. I helped with their training as well. So it was good to see that in the comments that you're making today about it and the stuff that you're trying to do there. I think it will be a big help, especially on patrol. And then I did two years with Homeland, which is a federal contract. And then I've been with Salt Lake for about 2 years. I'm currently on our public order unit along with our phlebotomy team. And I'm looking into doing, obviously, a lot more stuff with crisis intervention team, because I think mental health is a big thing that we need to address. And I think education on it will help a ton. So I'm glad you guys are addressing that. Why I want to be a part of that is because I think, along with Steve and Brandon, that not only like having our perspective and things on calls and things like that, but also gaining your guys' perspective. Like, the community is why we're here. So the only way we can help is together, right? So I'm here to, I think that's a big part for everyone, is engaging with the community. And I agree that we need to be working together to get to our goals. So I think that's why I'm here. And I think diversity is a big thing. I actually have a wife, so I think that's a big part of diversity too as well. So I could bring that perspective to the table as well for our community there. And I just want to be a part of something bigger to make a difference. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Is there anybody else, Lieutenant?
I couldn't see anybody else on there, so we'll try to get, a few at a time. We'll try to schedule a time when they can come and just listen and then introduce themselves or introduce at the beginning. So we appreciate this opportunity. We're looking forward to bridging this gap and helping make the change that's needed in law enforcement and for the community.
Thank you. And officers, I will tell you, your role is not to sit there in silence when you hear something you don't like or agree with. We would hope and ask you to offer your perspectives, because that's why you're there. So it's not, we don't expect you to agree with everything, but we would hope that we can hear your reasons why you disagree. So I'm sure we'll have some interesting and good conversations. So we much appreciate you wanting to be a part of this. Commissioner Powell?
I have a homework assignment for those 3 officers already. I ask you guys to go home. You already are home, hopefully. If you're not, Brendan, I hope you're having a good shift. What does community policing look like to you? And take a few days to reflect on that. And the next time we talk, I'd love to have an answer and to have a positive, good dialogue on that.
You didn't know you did homework, did you? Well, nicely done, Commissioner. Thank you. So again, we appreciate you being here and look forward to engaging with you.
Hey, Dante?
Yes, sir.
I know our time is short, and I want to thank Lieutenant Zayas for putting this group of officers together. We actually have, I think, 12, and we sent you the bios on those, so please share those with the commissioners. And these officers are great officers. and they're very committed to what we're trying to do, as you heard from these three. And Commissioner Powell, don't give them homework. I got to pay them overtime for that homework.
I have homework too. I wish I got paid overtime.
I'm just kidding. Thank you, everybody.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is, of the officers that were chosen, is there a clear understanding of why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish with this commission? I understand that I'm sorry about the first officer that spoke. I understand that there's maybe some distrust with the commission and police officers and why we were put together and not fully understanding the role of police officers within the community. I understand that, but I also just really want to know if a way that we can start to build that trust is to fully understand why we're here today. Well, why we've been here since whenever it was we were put together last year. So I mean, that's the people that signed up for it, is if they're clear understand, not just for an input of what it's like to be a police officer, a day in the life of a police officer, but not only just that, just why we're here today.
Sorry. Go ahead, Lieutenant.
I was just going to say, these officers were reached out to by my predecessor. So I'm hoping they have a clear understanding. And then as I've been attending the rep commission meetings, I've gained a better understanding of what direction you're trying to take. So I've tried to make sure that these officers who are still here wanting to build that bridge and help make that change, understand that as well, that it's just not about, like you said, understanding where we're coming from, but understanding where you're coming from as well, and creating a balance between the community and law enforcement. I mean, I truly do look at it as a building that bridge and building relationships, not only for us now, but for our future, for our children and their children and their children to come.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
I appreciate that.
Commissioner McDonald, is there an addition you would like to make to why we're here?
Who, me?
Yes, ma'am.
No, I have a pretty good understanding of why we're here, but I want to make sure that the officers that come on board that we're going to work with, that we trust, that we build that trust, and that there is trust there, and trust not only in the work that we're doing, but also in the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we want to do. And then as we go forward, and we go forward with really wanting to, I don't know if I really want to say change the culture. That's not really what I want to say. That's what's coming to my mind right now, but that's not necessarily what I want to say. So the words that I actually want to say is just escaping me right now. But to have better policing, whether that looks like community policing, whatever that may look like in the end game, but so that we can have better trust, better policing within the communities, and so that myself, my son, my daughters, no matter what, my friends, grandmother, doesn't matter, doesn't feel such apprehension and fear, and just real fear whenever is behind us or beside us, or even just walking towards us. So if we can find a way to address that, so that there isn't just this inner fear whenever we approach and see an officer that is trained and sworn to protect. That is what I want to get at, basically. And so that, I'm not saying that we need to walk away from this and we're buddies and friends. I mean, that's not necessarily what I'm saying. Although that'd be cool, let's go get a drink together. However, we need to be able to have a community that feels safe. And that's what I want.
Thank you, Commissioner. Which I think maybe gives me an opportunity to make a final point, which is something I meant to say at the beginning, and I want to say at the beginning of each and every one of our meetings going forward, which is remind us of what the definition that we're working with is of racial equity. And if you accept the one I provided in the session that I gave to the commission, it is simply that equity is achieved when one's identity cannot predict the outcome. And in this case, we're talking about one's race and ethnicity of color, that cannot predict the outcome. And I would suggest that it absolutely can predict the outcomes as it relates to police engagement, and certainly in general terms in the city of Salt Lake. We can look at the outcomes, and equity is not concerned with intentions. It only looks at outcomes. And what are those outcomes, and how do we improve them for specifically people of color in Salt Lake City, which will then by extension improve them for everyone who resides in the city of Salt Lake. So I hope that adds a little bit to the reason of why we're here, and is helpful to the new officers who are going to be engaging and participating with the members of this commission.
Thank you, Dante.
Any final thoughts before I let you get back to your life, even though we're a little bit over time? Final thoughts, questions, comments? I know y'all want to get to
Just that it was good conversation. I liked it.
Oh, I do want to just, a clarification was made by city staff after we talked about sending out that data meeting to everyone, that would present an issue of quorum. And so we're just I forwarded it to the subcommittee facilitators, and we're going to ask 1 or 2 members of each of the subcommittees to attend so that we don't run into an issue of quorum. Just to publicly amend what I said earlier.
Thank you. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I thank you very much for your engagement tonight. I think it's been a great, lots of conversation and voices that we don't usually hear, so I much appreciate that as well. So we will move to next week's subcommittees and keep on doing this good work, and have a fabulous evening. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.